In the turbulent summer of 1940, as Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany, the waters of the Mediterranean and the North Atlantic became the stage for a hidden war. Few civilians knew that beneath the waves, a silent contest was unfolding, one in which British submarines, among the Royal Navy's most valuable reconnaissance assets, began to vanish without warning. The first of these disappearances would shake naval planners and introduce a mystery that still lingers today: the unexplained loss of HMS Regulus. Regulus was a veteran of the pre-war fleet, a slender river-class submarine launched in 1930. By the time the war erupted, she had already sailed thousands of miles and endured multiple refits, including one at Malta in mid-1941. Her mission on September 23 of that year appeared routine: depart from Alexandria, transit quietly into the Ionian Sea, and conduct reconnaissance on Italian naval traffic. She was to send basic positional signals every 48 hours. Yet after slipping beneath the harbor waters, Regulus would never transmit again. The struggle of submarine crews during this era was immense. Patrols were long, hot, and claustrophobic. The men aboard Regulus, 52 in total, operated in cramped corridors that baked under Mediterranean heat. Diesel fumes seeped into every surface. One former officer from a similar vessel later wrote in his diary, "We lived in a tube that stank of fuel and metal. Sleep was a luxury." The real enemy was not always the Italians, it was the sea itself. These conditions shaped every patrol, pushing crews and commanders to their limits. Intelligence from the period gives us the broader context. By September 1941, the British Mediterranean Fleet was in crisis. Axis forces were reinforcing North Africa, and the Royal Navy surface losses made submarines essential for tracking convoys leaving Taranto, Brindisi, and the Dodecanese. The first submarine flotilla, to which Regulus was attached, was ordered to operate aggressively. Admiral Andrew Cunningham noted in a briefing, "We must rely heavily on our submarines. Enemy supply lines must be squeezed at every turn." With this directive, Regulus received her charted patrol box, a rough square north of Zante, where she was expected to linger for 10 days. But somewhere between Alexandria and her assigned area, something went fatally wrong. Italian naval archives from 1941 show no recorded attacks that match the timeline or position of the British submarine. No aircraft from the Regia Aeronautica reported sighting a submerged target. And crucially, no Italian destroyer claimed a kill. This absence of combat data is unusual. Italian patrol boats frequently made claims, even when unverifiable. Yet about Regulus the records are silent. Post-war researchers proposed mines as the likeliest explanation. Throughout late 1940 and early 1941, both Axis and Allied forces had laid minefields across the entrance to the Ionian Sea. Some were documented, others were improvised and never properly mapped. A declassified British Admiralty note from 1946 reads, "Minefield records in the Mediterranean were incomplete. Certain Italian fields were not charted until after hostilities. Regulus, traveling surfaced at night and submerged during daylight, could easily have drifted across an unmarked line of mines. But the mine theory has holes. Her patrol route kept her well south of the densest mine belts. Moreover, Royal Navy signals logs indicate no final transmission of any kind, not even an abrupt static burst. A mine would likely have destroyed the bow or stern but might still leave a fragment of noise. On that September day, the radios heard nothing. Mechanical failure also remains possible. Submarines of Regulus's class suffered chronic engine overheating. A ruptured fuel line or battery explosion could have incapacitated her. But such a malfunction, if it occurred near the surface, might still have allowed emergency surfacing or a distress signal. The complete silence suggests a sudden catastrophe. Modern marine archaeologists have searched segments of the Ionian Basin for decades. Italian divers in the 1970s explored areas near Cephalonia. British teams surveyed deeper trenches in the early 2000s using multi-beam sonar. Yet no confirmed wreck of Regulus has ever been located. The Mediterranean seabed in that region drops abruptly to depths exceeding 3,000 meters, making search efforts profoundly difficult. One sonar operator remarked, "It is a vertical desert down there. You can hide a fleet in those canyons." The mystery surrounding Regulus offers a sobering lesson on the wartime limits of communication and navigation. In an era before GPS, before satellite monitoring, a submarine could vanish completely and often did. The sea kept its secrets, and wartime records left only shadows of the truth. For the families of the 52 men aboard, the Admiralty's final note, "Missing 'cause unknown," was both a verdict and a wound that never fully healed. Yet Regulus was only the beginning. Her loss marked the first in a pattern that would trouble British command for years. Another submarine, HMS Triton, would disappear next, under circumstances just as strange and just as silent. As investigators turned their attention to this second case, they found themselves deepening, not solving, the growing puzzle of Britain's vanishing submarines. In the closing days of 1940, as the Mediterranean became a labyrinth of patrol lines, minefields, and contested waters, one of the Royal Navy's most capable submarines slipped beneath the surface and vanished. HMS Triton, known throughout the fleet for her experienced crew and successful patrol record, departed from Malta on November 28, 1940. Her destination was the southern approaches to the Strait of Otranto, a critical choke point used by Italian convoys heading toward North Africa. What should have been a structured, carefully charted mission instead became one of the most perplexing disappearances of the submarine war. Triton belonged to the T-class, a newer and more powerful generation of British submarines. At nearly 275 feet from bow to stern, she carried 53 crew members, 10 torpedo tubes, and a powerful diesel-electric propulsion system. Crews considered the T-class more spacious than the earlier River-class boats, though conditions were still harsh. One petty officer later recalled, "You could measure the distance between hammocks in inches. Privacy was a memory, not a reality." But Triton's men had morale, discipline, and a commander, Lieutenant Commander H.G. Dymott, renowned for his calm precision under pressure. Her mission profile was deceptively simple: intercept Axis merchantmen moving between Bari, Brindisi, and the Adriatic Islands. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had intercepted several Italian naval signals that indicated increased supply runs to Albania. The first submarine flotilla needed confirmation and disruption. Triton, with her experienced crew and proven track record, was ideal for the assignment. Yet by December 6, she was overdue for her routine position signal. On December 8, the Admiralty formally listed Triton as missing. No distress call, no fading Morse tap, nothing. To understand the pressures facing Triton's crew, one must consider the strategic chaos unfolding in the region. The Luftwaffe had increased reconnaissance flights from Lecce. Italian MAS torpedo boats prowled the waters at night, while German and Italian minefields, often undocumented or imprecisely charted, filled shallow channels. The British were aware of some mine belts, particularly those laid early in the war, but they operated under outdated assumptions. A handwritten note found in Cunningham's 1940 staff briefing states, "Mine patterns around Otranto remain uncertain. Extreme caution required." For a submarine navigating largely blind, these uncertainties could prove fatal. A wartime diary from an officer who served on HMS Torbay, another T-class submarine in the region, provides a chilling insight. He wrote, "We knew we were threading a needle. 1 mile off course could be your last. The charts were guesses. Every dive felt like a wager." Triton was operating in those same treacherous channels. Researchers studying Italian naval logs eventually uncovered records of a depth charge engagement off the coast of Santa Maria di Lucca on December 6. An Italian destroyer group, commanded by Capitano di Fregata Alberto Leis, reported contact with presumed submarine. They dropped a series of charges and noted rising oil on the surface, but no wreckage, no debris, and no bodies. Post-war interrogation of the Italian crew suggested uncertainty. Some officers believed they had attacked a false sonar echo, a common occurrence in turbulent shallows. Many historians initially favored this engagement as the most likely cause of Triton's disappearance. However, timing raised doubts. Triton's orders would have placed her farther south during the engagement, and no British records indicate she had moved north prematurely. British naval historian Captain Edward Young later observed, "It is improbable Triton shifted sectors without explicit orders. She was a disciplined boat commanded by a disciplined man. If the Italian destroyers did not sink her, then what did?" The minefield theory resurfaces in the case of Triton with uncomfortable weight. The Strait of Otranto was lined with defensive mine belts, some laid by Italian forces as late as November 1940, just days before Triton's patrol began. These late-war mine lines were poorly documented and in some cases never recorded. A post-war Italian Admiralty memorandum admitted, several defensive fields were laid in haste. Maps were incomplete. If Triton unknowingly crossed one of these improvised fields, she would have disappeared instantly, leaving no time for signals or survival. And then there is the final haunting layer of mystery, wreckage, or rather the absence of it. Search operations conducted in the 1960s and again in the 1990s using commercial sonar identified numerous deep anomalies, but none were confirmed as Triton. The seabed off Otranto plunges rapidly to depths beyond 1,000 meters, and submarine hulls at that depth can collapse into fragments indistinguishable from natural formations. One sonar technician famously remarked, "We could be staring directly at her and never know." Triton's loss sent shockwaves through the first submarine flotilla. She had been a reliable vessel, a symbol of stability in a theater defined by uncertainty. Her disappearance raised urgent questions that commanders could not answer. How many minefields remained unmapped? Were Italian destroyers becoming more efficient? Were British patrol routes predictable and therefore vulnerable? These concerns shaped subsequent submarine strategy in the Mediterranean. Yet despite exhaustive research, the fate of HMS Triton remains unresolved. She vanished silently, leaving behind nothing but questions, incomplete records, and the grief of families who never received closure. Her loss deepened the Admiralty's growing unease, an unease that would only intensify as yet another submarine, HMS Tempest, met a similarly mysterious end in early 1942. By early 1942, the war in the Mediterranean had become a contest of attrition, strategy, and nerve. British submarines operating out of Malta, already one of the most heavily bombed locations on Earth, were pushed to their operational limits. Among them was HMS Tempest, a T-class submarine tasked with a hazardous assignment: locate and harass Axis convoys supplying Rommel's Africa Corps. The mission itself was perilous, but what happened next would become one of the era's most perplexing naval enigmas, one shaped by conflicting reports, fragmentary records, and a silence that has never been fully explained. Tempest departed Malta on February 10, 1942 under the command of Lieutenant Commander WWII Napier, a disciplined officer with a reputation for caution. She carried a seasoned crew of 61 men and a standard complement of torpedoes, mines, and reconnaissance equipment. Her patrol area was defined clearly: the waters south of Taranto, an Italian naval stronghold fortified with destroyers, coastal batteries, and extensive mine belts. It was a high-risk zone, but British intelligence believed an Italian convoy might be preparing to sail from Taranto to Tripoli. Tempest's role was to intercept. The struggle was evident from the moment Tempest left port. Malta submarine crews were living through one of the harshest operational periods of the war. Fuel shortages, constant air raids, and mechanical wear plagued every patrol. A surviving fragment from a crewman's notebook, found years later in a family attic, captured the tension. Each departure felt like the last time you'd see land. The sea was our refuge and our danger. These men operated knowing they were often outnumbered, outgunned, and navigating charts riddled with inaccuracies. According to Tempest's orders, she was to patrol until February 23 and then report back to Malta. But events unfolded more rapidly and more quietly than Naval Command expected. Italian Naval Archives later revealed that on the night of February 13, the destroyer Circe, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Paolo Manecchi, detected what they believed to be a submarine contact using newly installed sonar equipment. This was significant. Italian destroyers had recently improved their hydrophone and sonar capability, though few British commanders were aware of the technical upgrade. Circe initiated a depth charge attack, dropping a cluster of charges calibrated for mid-depth detonation. These depth charge patterns were meticulously timed and spaced. Italian logs describe a violent boiling of water and air pockets rising to the surface, indicators consistent with underwater damage. Yet these testimonies conflict with British operational records, which place Tempest far outside that precise location on the 13th. The Admiralty's post-war analysis insisted that Tempest would not have reached the attack zone until hours later, and only if traveling at maximum speed, a tactic she did not typically employ. Then came another discrepancy. A second Italian source, a coastal observation post at Capo Colon, reported hearing a submerged explosion on the same night but several miles southeast of Circe's engagement. This secondary report suggests the possibility of a mine detonation rather than a depth charge impact. Italian and German forces had laid multiple new minefields around Taranto in late January, some reportedly without finalized charts due to rushed deployment. If Tempest stumbled into one of these fields, the crew would have had little chance of survival or signaling. A surviving document from the Mediterranean Fleet Headquarters dated March 1942 reflects the confusion. Enemy reports are contradictory. Engagement may be genuine or misidentified. Mine detonation remains possible. No signal received from Tempest. The lack of a single, coherent narrative has frustrated historians for decades. Yet the most haunting clue arrived months later. In June 1942, Italian fishermen recovered a piece of wooden decking, likely from a T-class submarine, floating south of Calabria. The Admiralty could not conclusively attribute it to Tempest. The fragment bore no serial markings. Still, its location suggested Tempest may have been farther north than her official patrol limits. Was Napier pursuing a convoy sighting? Had he adjusted course based on intercepted signals? Or had mechanical issues forced him off his route? Anecdotal accounts from Italian naval veterans complicate matters even further. One sonar operator interviewed in the 1970s described the contact on February 13 as weak, inconsistent, almost ghost-like. Some historians interpret this detail as an indication that Tempest may have been operating below her recommended test depth, perhaps attempting to avoid detection or evade destroyers. If so, structural failure cannot be ruled out. T-class submarines occasionally suffered hull stress at extreme depths. The reveal that unsettles researchers most is the final note in Tempest's official Admiralty file. No distress signal. No emergency buoy released. No debris recovered. A submarine destroyed by depth charges or a mine would likely leave oil or wreckage. A sub that suffers catastrophic internal failure, however, may sink almost vertically and silently. Modern sonar expeditions have searched portions of the seabed south of Taranto, but the underwater terrain complicates identification. Deep trenches, geological formations, and wartime debris create countless false leads. One Italian maritime historian commented in 2010, "The sea hides what it chooses. Tempest may rest beneath a mile of water, broken into unrecognizable shapes." The disappearance of HMS Tempest stands at the crossroads of conflicting evidence. Italian logs suggesting a successful attack, Allied records indicating positional inconsistencies, and the possibility of an uncharted minefield sealing her fate. Like Regulus and Triton before her, Tempest's vanishing contributed to a growing unease within the Royal Navy, an understanding that the Mediterranean was becoming not just a battlefield, but a graveyard of unanswered questions. And the pattern would continue. As British intelligence struggled to parse the tangled clues, two more submarines, HMS Sahib and HMS Tigris, would vanish next, deepening the mystery and leaving historians with an increasingly troubling mosaic of losses. In the spring of 1942, the war beneath the Mediterranean surface had entered a lethal rhythm, one defined by relentless patrols, invisible dangers, and the growing sense that British submarines were being drawn into a tightening net. It was into this fraught environment that HMS Tempest disappeared, and only weeks later, HMS Sahib and HMS Tigris would follow. But even before their losses rattled the Admiralty, another submarine, HMS Sahib, emerged as a case study in how confusion, incomplete records, and sudden violence could erase an entire vessel without leaving a trace. HMS Sahib was a newer S-class submarine, built in 1942 and commanded by Lieutenant John Bromage, a decorated officer known for bold yet calculating tactics. She carried 48 men, 8 torpedoes, and the lessons of previous British losses. The Admiralty emphasized caution, stressing that Italian destroyers operating from Taranto and Messina were becoming more aggressive and technologically capable. Sahib departed Malta on March 25, 1942 with orders to patrol off Calabria and the southern Adriatic, a region saturated with Italian supply traffic yet heavily mined. For submarine crews at Malta, life had become a cycle of intense readiness and emotional strain. German and Italian aircraft bombed the island daily. Spare parts, rations, and repair facilities were stretched to their limits. A surviving letter from a torpedo mechanic on Malta described the feeling succinctly: "We patched these boats together with what we had." Every departure felt like sending a friend out to sea with broken armor. Amid this pressure, Sahib sailed into a patrol area that British intelligence believed was moderately active, though not excessively dangerous. But intelligence, as the crews knew too well, was often incomplete. Sahib's first patrol reports were encouraging. On March 31, she intercepted an Italian supply ship near Cape Spartivento, firing a torpedo that missed but prompted aggressive countermeasures from 2 Italian escort vessels. A decrypted signal intercepted at Malta recorded that the escorts engaged unidentified submarine presence, but the report contained no claims of damage. Sahib appeared to have escaped. Then, on April 2, all transmissions ceased. The struggle to understand Sahib's fate begins with a cluster of conflicting Italian sources. The destroyer Genier, operating near the Gulf of Squillace, recorded an active sonar contact at 0500 hours on April 3. The ship executed a symmetrical depth charge pattern, 6 charges at varying intervals, before noting a column of oil rising to the surface. Post-war testimony from Genier's captain, Lieutenant Commander Carlo Guddi, claimed the attack was highly probable to have sunk a submarine. However, Italian naval records from the same day also indicate the presence of floating oil slicks attributed to a damaged merchant vessel hit days earlier. Modern researchers now view the oil rising report with caution. Other Italian documents introduce yet another possibility: a mine detonation. On April 1, Italian engineers completed the last phase of a new defensive mine belt near Cape Stylo. The minefield was not fully charted, nor was it included in Italian operational notifications until several days later. A British submarine entering the region at periscope depth could have easily triggered one of these mines. An Italian mine specialist writing in 1951 remarked, "The fields laid that week were crude, rapid deployments." Documentation followed later, often with errors. If Sahib encountered one of these mines, the crew may have been lost instantly, leaving the Admiralty with no clues to analyze. And yet another thread complicates the mystery. In 1977, a retired Italian petty officer recounted that Janier's sonar contact on April 3 was weak and fragmented. He suggested that the crew may have attacked a thermal layer, an oceanographic effect that can distort sonar signals and create false returns. This interpretation gained traction among naval historians, who note that offshore Calabria in early spring is prone to abrupt thermocline shifts. If Janier attacked a false contact, then the sonar trace that supposedly indicated Sahib might have been nothing more than cold and warm water mixing. Meanwhile, British records reveal no evidence that Sahib was in distress. Her scheduled signal on April 2 never arrived, and Malta logged no anomalies on the radio frequency she used. The silence was complete and abrupt. The Admiralty's final wartime note reads only, "Sahib has failed to report. Cause unknown." The reveal grows more unsettling when considering her patrol boundaries. A marginal handwritten annotation on her patrol order, likely added during a last-minute briefing, suggests that Bromage may have been granted limited discretion to investigate unusual traffic patterns south of Crotone. If Sahib exercised that discretion, she might have ventured close to uncharted Italian minefields or crossed paths with destroyers that never filed formal action reports. Unlike other submarine losses where fragments or debris eventually surfaced, Sahib left no trace. Not a raft, not a buoy, not a piece of timber. The seabed off Calabria descends sharply into deep ravines, making any wreck nearly impossible to locate even with modern sonar. A marine archaeologist involved in a 1998 survey remarked, "Those trenches are knife-edge deep. A submarine can fall in and disappear from all detection." The application of these mysteries to modern naval history is clear. Accurate mapping, real-time communication, and hydrographic consistency were luxuries the World War II Mediterranean could not provide. The loss of Sahib underscores how thin the margin for error was, and how the sea could transform error into catastrophe without witnesses. As April 1942 ended, the Royal Navy was forced to accept the loss. Yet there was no time to grieve. Only weeks later, HMS Tigris, one of Britain's most accomplished submarines, would vanish next. And with her disappearance, the pattern of silent losses reached a level that the Admiralty could no longer dismiss as coincidence. By mid-1942, the Admiralty was facing an unsettling pattern, one submarine after another vanishing without clear cause, without distress signals, and often without confirmed enemy action. The loss of HMS Regulus, Triton, and Tempest had already shaken confidence. The disappearance of HMS Sahib added another unresolved case. But it was the fate of HMS Tigris, one of the Royal Navy's most experienced, battle-tested submarines, that struck the deepest blow. Her loss in early 1943 raised alarms not only because she was a veteran vessel, but because she disappeared in waters where Allied control was steadily improving. Tigris was not an inexperienced boat on a risky first mission. She was a symbol of proficiency, and her vanishing seemed to defy expectation. HMS Tigris, launched in 1939, had built a formidable reputation. By 1943 she had sunk more than a dozen Axis vessels and participated in some of the Royal Navy's most daring Mediterranean operations. Her commander, Lieutenant Commander George Henry Giddings, was known for his meticulous navigation, crisp discipline, and a keen understanding of Italian anti-submarine tactics. His crew of over 60 men trusted him implicitly. A surviving letter from a petty officer aboard a sister submarine read simply, "If you wanted to return home alive, Tigris was the boat you wished you were on." Her final mission began on February 18, 1943, when Tigris departed from Algiers to patrol the Gulf of Naples and the western approaches of Calabria. The goal was to intercept German supply vessels rerouting through Italian coastal waters. Intelligence at the time indicated an uptick in traffic transporting equipment for the defense of Sicily. Tigris was to operate close to shore, identify fast-moving targets, and record convoy patterns for a planned Allied push later that year. The struggle began almost immediately. Weather conditions along the Tyrrhenian coast were harsh. Cold fronts sweeping down from the Apennines brought rough seas and unpredictable visibility. The hulls of British submarines were not designed for comfort in winter Mediterranean storms. A diary entry from an officer on HMS Safari, patrolling nearby, captured the atmosphere. Waves hit the casing like hammer blows. The boat groaned with every swell. Tigris, somewhere in that same tumult, pressed on. Her last confirmed transmission came on February 23, a routine position report with no sign of trouble. After that, silence. Italian sources from the period offer what appears to be the closest thing to an explanation, but the accounts are riddled with contradictions. On February 27, the Italian corvette Antares, commanded by Captain Marco Revedin, reported detecting a submarine contact off Capri. Using hydrophones, the crew believed they had traced propeller noise consistent with a submerged boat. Antares launched a depth charge pattern, 10 charges arranged in a widening semicircle. Italian logs claim that following the attack, air and debris surfaced in small quantities. This was interpreted as evidence of damage, possibly a kill. Yet British intelligence later reviewed German and Italian communication traffic for that day and found anomalies. A Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft operating from Naples reported no submarine activity detected in the same region at the same hour, contradicting Antares' stated position. Even Italian naval historians later questioned the reliability of the action report, noting that wartime records often conflated anti-submarine engagements due to the chaos of operations. Complicating matters further is the geospatial issue. Tigris's assigned patrol boundaries place her dozens of miles from the zone Antares claimed to have attacked. While submarines occasionally deviated from orders to pursue targets, Giddings was known for strict adherence to command instructions. If Tigris had shifted that far north without authorization, there would likely have been a reason, but none is recorded, hinted, or suggested by Allied files. Another possible explanation lies with mines. In early February 1943, German engineers, supported by Italian naval units, laid fresh minefields near Salerno, Capri, and the Gulf of Gaeta. These mines included newer acoustic types, detonating in response to engine noise, not contact. British intelligence did not yet have full maps of these deployments. If Tigris crossed into one of these fields preparing for future Allied operations, she would have had little chance to react. The suddenness of such a detonation might explain the absence of distress signals or later debris. However, modern assessments cast doubt on the mine-only theory. Acoustic mines were typically deployed in shallow coastal waters, whereas Tigris operated deeper offshore. Unless she strayed unusually close to land, she might never have encountered these fields. The most unsettling reveal emerged decades later. A handwritten, undated annotation in the Admiralty's declassified file on Tigris. It reads, "No HF signals post 23 February. Possible rapid loss. No further data." Its brevity underscores the frustrating lack of evidence. Tigris simply vanished. Marine surveys conducted in the late 20th and early 21st centuries found no wreck matching her dimensions. The seabed in the region is rugged, marked by steep escarpments and submarine canyons that could easily conceal a steel hull. A sonar operator involved in a 2001 survey near Gaeta remarked, "You could hide an ocean liner down there and miss it." The disappearance of Tigris pushed the pattern of mysterious losses to its peak. By early 1943, 5 British submarines, Regulus, Triton, Tempest, Sahib, and now Tigris, had vanished under circumstances that were unclear, disputed, or entirely undocumented. Each case had plausible theories. None had definitive answers. And as the Allies prepared for the invasion of Italy, Naval Command sought one final set of reviews to understand what had gone wrong, an effort that produced more questions than solutions, setting the stage for the final chapter of this troubling wartime puzzle. By the time 1945 arrived and the guns fell silent across Europe, the Royal Navy was left with a ledger of victories, but also a haunting list of unanswered losses. Among these were the mysterious disappearances of 5 British submarines, Regulus, Triton, Tempest, Sahib, and Tigris. Their stories, scattered across the Mediterranean and the Ionian Sea, formed a mosaic of silence, one made of contradictory reports, missing records, and the vast, unforgiving geography of the deep. As the Admiralty began its post-war investigations, naval intelligence officers hoped the collapse of the Axis would yield new clarity. Instead, they uncovered a patchwork of partial answers that deepened the mysteries rather than resolved them. The Admiralty Submarine Losses Review Group, established in late 1945, began by collecting all wartime logs, patrol orders, enemy action reports, and declassified signals. The group's first finding was as unsettling as it was simple. The available data was fragmentary, often inconsistent, and in many cases contradictory. Italian naval archives, damaged during Allied bombing, provided incomplete minefield maps. German records often recorded anti-submarine actions only in aggregated form. Many British wartime logs were themselves hurriedly written during periods of crisis. A senior intelligence officer, Commander A.D. Bradshaw, summarized the challenge in a memorandum dated February 1946. "We are reconstructing shadows. Time, tide, and war have erased the traces we require." This sense of uncertainty influenced every stage of the investigation. The struggle to form a coherent narrative became evident as investigators revisited each disappearance. Regulus, lost in 1941, offered no tangible leads whatsoever. Her patrol box near Zante featured dozens of uncharted wartime mine placements. Divers who surveyed the region decades later described an underwater landscape more akin to a cliffside than a seabed. Triton, missing near the Strait of Otranto in 1940, represented a different type of mystery. Overlapping, incompatible accounts. Italian destroyers reported engaging a submarine. Allied records insisted she wasn't there. Post-war interviews admitted the possibility of false sonar echoes. Tempest's fate became a case study in analytical frustration. Her final moments were obscured by conflicting Italian reports, one suggesting a destroyer attack, another hinting at a mine detonation. British patrol logs placed her miles from each reported engagement. The more one studies the Tempest case, the less certain one becomes, a naval historian remarked years later. Sahib and Tigris deepened the puzzle. Sahib vanished near Calabria in waters clouded by hurriedly laid Italian minefields and limited radar coverage. Tigris disappeared in 1943 despite increasing Allied air and sea reconnaissance, yet Italian accounts of a kill were unverified and uncorroborated by neutral data. In every case, enemy claims were plausible but not definitive. Minefield explanations were possible but often poorly mapped. Mechanical failures were conceivable but untraceable. With each submarine, the investigative arc followed a similar pattern. An initial promising lead slowly unraveled under scrutiny, replaced by broader uncertainty. The reveal at the heart of the Admiralty's review was this: no single systemic cause could explain the pattern. The losses were not the work of a new enemy weapon, nor a secret Italian tactic, nor a targeted operation. Instead, they reflected the chaotic intersection of wartime conditions: minefields laid in haste, enemy logs written under duress, navigational charts rendered inaccurate by incomplete intelligence, and the immense depth and complexity of the southern Mediterranean seafloor. In their internal reflections, some officers admitted an uncomfortable truth. "These were the limits of our instruments, our charts, and our understanding," wrote Captain Edward Hardwick in 1947. "The sea is vast and our knowledge was not." This humility permeated the final report filed that same year, a document that allocated probable causes but acknowledged the uncertainties surrounding each case. The application of these wartime mysteries to modern naval scholarship is clear. The study of submarine losses has driven advancements in hydrographic mapping, underwater archaeology, sonar technology, and naval intelligence analysis. Every new discovery, whether a wreck located off Sicily or an updated model of a World War II mine, reshapes how historians understand these losses. And yet, despite new tools, several wrecks, including Regulus, Triton, and Tigris, remain undiscovered. As the review group closed its investigation, the officers involved were left with a lingering sense of incompleteness. Families received official letters, formal lines of gratitude, sacrifice, and uncertainty. For many, closure never came. A widow of a Triton crewman wrote in 1948, "The war is over, but the waiting has not ended." Her words echo across decades, capturing the emotional weight behind the cold, factual summaries. In the end, the mystery remains not because of conspiracy or secrecy, but because of geography, timing, and the inherent risk of submarine warfare in an era of imperfect information. The Mediterranean holds its secrets well. Even today, on modern sonar maps, its deep trenches and abrupt escarpments appear like scars across the ocean floor, silent reminders of missions attempted, dangers unseen, and vessels lost. As the documentary's narrative concludes, one fact stands above all others. These submarines were among the silent warriors of the Second World War, and their disappearance reflects both the bravery of their crews and the unpredictable nature of the war they fought. Their fates, still uncertain, continue to inspire divers, historians, and naval researchers to keep searching, listening, and questioning. The story does not truly end. It simply descends, like the submarines themselves, into the deep where answers remain shrouded, waiting for the day they might finally surface.